as you work that reading muscle and increases from mojo reading into being able to read other people's effect on you, and not just your understanding of them in the direct experience, but also the experience you have with yourself when you self-dialogue, when you think about things, when you imagine things, when you remember things. Your mojo reading ability will they'll affect your speculations, your memories, your idea of what virtue is, code of conduct. Also systems, because there's a human math. So humans are a system, a beautiful heroic system, but they're a system of natural law as well. You can look at them that way, and it is helpful to do so because it adds to the truth of it. As you flex that muscle more, as you work it out more, you'll be able to read more than just mojo. You'll be able to read motif, which is, for example, just development, different development between people. That's a motif. So stress locked such and such mojo, and you see another stress locked such mojo, and you're like, that's a motif. You see a certain activity, a certain way they do things, or something that is based on that mojo being stressed. And you see the same kind of thing, the same principle being enacted with another human, but maybe human is that mojo or similar mojo, and a similar things are going on. That's a motif, that's a principle. And that is actually true. It is true that is actually a mathematical variant of a natural law that made all humans. And if you're actually able to read that on each other, you can actually read story. You can read mojo, you can read motif, so you can read story. A good thing that works with this is social alchemy, which is basically that there are energetic relationships between humans, as we already talked about, but that also there is motifs to them. That not just development of an individual mojo, but the way they interact with other mojos, both on how many mojos, the development of the mojos involved, and just volumes, numbers of them. That changes the story. So as you're able to flex, you're able to see what you read in story form. So as you're able to read more and more, for example, say, Zhai, then you're able to read the Zhai story, the story of Zhai as a phenomenon among humans. You can read that story and these various enactors of that overall story, the Zhai mojo for the tribe of humanity, for the human collective, the human species, whatever word you're comfortable with. But there's actually an ongoing series of motifs that are enacted by the different mojos, and it creates a story, and all those mojos are enacting it. And then you turn that back on yourself and you realize, I am enacting a story. That story is layered on top of math. So it's like an RPG game all the way out into the most exquisite piece of literature you've ever read, with everything in between. So on the artistic end, yes, it's artistic, but there also is a math that it works in perfect synergy with the art of humans. So if you use the what's this person's story flex of your metaphysical muscle, if you've been doing all the reading things you need to do to get to here, if you've actually accomplished them, you should easily be able to read story. When you say what's this person's story, you'll get an overall thing. And that relates to you based on if it's the same mojo you are or one of the other 15 or 32 gender mojos, etc., etc. We'll move on from there. But again, like comparing two works of art, realizing that the overall math of humans, it starts to be of the kind of understanding that you need to think about in story terms. But you can actually at any point take the story and actually go into the math of it, and all the pod powers are there doing what pod powers do. So all the math is all there at all levels. But to understand humans interacting, you'll find that there are motifs for Ni Alpha, Xi Alpha, you know what I mean? Adaptive centralists, anything, there is a way to them. And if you try to understand in mathematical terms, you can't follow the rhythm of that natural law, but you were designed to. If you keep flexing your muscle on just following that motif, you'll find that you were designed to actually recognize these various motifs of your mojo compared to someone else and what that means as far as understanding and enactment. This starts with your own mojo, and I can go through all social alchemy right now, but basically you start with your own mojo, you see your own mojo, and you see, oh wow, they're all having a story. That means I'm having a story. Story math. Next is the fact that seeing the story of two people. So I'm doing social alchemy, but not teaching social alchemy, I'm teaching about reading. You're reading Nijez. If you keep reading humans and get to where you can read in general better and better, you'll start to be able to read other layers. You'll go deeper, you'll go more expansively, more nuanced, more specific, but you'll just get better depending on what you flex your muscle on. But as you flex it more and more in reading truth, true natural law, you have a muscle that was designed to do that. All energetic creations in the cosmos, including all the animal life on planet Earth, were designed to do that, and we're the best. We're the best at doing that. So let your evolved advantages do what they do. People often ask, what is this good for? That's right there. As you're able to understand mojo, you can understand what's going on, so you can understand if it's going well or not, and how you feel about that, and what you want to do about that. So that's very, very advantageous. One that comes up a lot, very important, is actually knowing about storylines, because the next kind of reading ability you'll get is complete story. Once you realize that all mojos are kind of a story, it's easier to understand the math of it, as the math is layered, just so many layers. That's like trying to understand a great painting by each individual brushstroke. That may be useful at some point for a special kind of admiration or understanding, but in general, you actually need to kind of take it in as an artwork, because that is the language it's rendered in, so you have to understand it in that form of understanding. The understanding continuum, you have to understand natural law in whatever ways natural law presents itself to you. So it presents itself in details, in patterns, in logic, and in values. All those are part of natural law. As your reading muscle increases, as your heroic powers of understanding natural law increase, as your enlightenment increases, you will actually be able to read the motif of a complete storyline, which is, again, look those up, but Nijez, Zenez, yada yada, Zenez. These actually are a motif, and as you increase your ability to read story, your psyche will actually inform you when you're looking at a motif, such as a well-developed, mojo versus a not so well. It'll tell you what that is. Once you can read a mojo at all, your psyche, if you keep doing that activity, getting better at that activity, it will keep giving you more and more information, not just what they are, but how well they're doing that. So the one that's connected, you just got to keep flexing on reading, and then all these other informations that reading gives you will just keep coming forward as you flex stronger and stronger. So one that comes up is that actually all humans are part of a story that combines 8 powers. And you can read this on other humans once you get good enough. You can read motif that when you look at, for example, any of the inspirationals, you look at Zenez, for example, you look at the Zenez, you'll be able to see a complete motif. The muscle that reads motifs is the same muscle that reads mojo. Mojo is just smaller. So once you actually are good at reading the mojo, that muscle will come in there as well. It's kind of like if you were training to, do one particular kind of track and field, but you hadn't been doing track and field in your life at all up till then. You're actually, whether you know this or not, you may not be aware of any other track and field activity except the one you're doing for some reason, the life you lead or your understanding. But actually, if you work in any track and field event, you actually are going to have some crossover into the other events more than you had when you were doing nothing. So if you start mojo reading, you're basically going from having done no activity at all to actually doing a very high level activity that gives you a lot of abilities and crossovers in everything. So you want to look out for them so you can go, that's there, and thus you can observe the natural. It's there, but you actually had to flex a muscle. You had to get in touch that muscle and then start flexing. So one of the feats that you'll be able to do of reading is reading the motif of a complete storyline with all 8 powers, and you realize that happens. Like these things you realize, they come in like units or geometry. That means there's only 16 mojos, for example. There's only 8 storylines. There are 8 storylines with 2 people holding half of it. And you can look at it through one partner's half leading to the other one and back, or you look at that person from their end going to their partner and back. Once you can read mojo, you'll start being able to read motif. And that is a huge motif, which is one, there is story. That's you recognizing the story of other mojos like your mojo. Then recognizing actually the complete story is 8 powers in a productive, harmonious arrangement with 2 people, each people, one holding half of it. So humans are actually designed at a very base level. They have all these relationships between, like, momentum modulation, yada yada yada, right, back and forth, directive, adaptive, subjective, objective, all these kinds of things. Now you're realizing there is a connection between people, and you can do it either way. It's the same triangulation before, but it's more advanced, and you can do it either way. You can actually start with being able to read outwardly the motif of an inspirational couple, good or bad, anything in between. But you can actually read that's a motif, and that muscle that can read mojo is part of human. It's a human math muscle. It's a human math reading muscle. So when you turn on your human math, which is actually a natural law reading muscle. So it'll start as a mojo reading muscle, but really it's a human math reading muscle, which is really a natural law reading muscle. Okay, so as you actually are able to read out here, that can bring understanding inside, or you often, especially certain mojos that are subjective, you may find that as you dialogue along your inner world, you're more inner oriented. It may be an understanding of your own inner processes more, but they're triangulated. There's your conscious understanding, then you're seeing something out here, and then you're going inside with yourself and self-dialoguing. And either way, you're going to realize, because it's the truth, is that humans actually come as 8 storylines that work together. These 8 storylines actually break into 16 basic configurations, where we get into other things like gender and so forth. But there's 16, but it's 8 stories making up one story. One story goes into these 8 stories, which goes into 16 mojos, which are each a story. Okay, now we're talking about reading story. We can start getting to the other social alchemies. We'll run through them real quick. I can do a bunch of the social alchemies in a bunch here, because the principle at play, there is story. The story reading muscle comes from the mojo reading muscle. Mojo reading muscle takes you to story reading muscle. And then from story reading muscle to the realization that actually humans are in an 8 pod power story, every one, which 2 people are holding. There's like 2 big principles. The next major principle will catch a lot of the social alchemy, which is the principle that there are all kinds of variations on the story, and these stories make you grow. So same source, inverse, storyline, source song, all of them in there, all the way down the change flow, and the harder ones like shades of consciousness and priority. They're explained in other filmings like social alchemy. The main thing is the realization that humans have a math, and that math is actually understood in a lot of ways when you're just doing normal human stuff as a story. And that humans have a story, you have a story variety, being your mojo. Stories actually are 8 powers long, but you only consciously hold 4. And that another human and your unconscious actually hold the 4 you don't hold. Okay, so you can read those. And now you're reading that your storyline, let's say Nagez. The Nagez storyline, if you actually do it really well, it wants to have Nagez friends. It wants to have Genez friends. And so it goes all the way down the pathway to having all humans be your friends in productive harmony. That's what humans want, and you'll be able to read this. This is not fluff, whifty, new agey stuff. This is hardcore, actually natural law math. The math of it is, humans are designed with awesome math, cool, techie design, but when you actually use it, it looks and feels like a story, and you are holding one of a basic unit size of story is actually 8 powers. So humans are actually holding only half a story. Each of those stories, 8 of them, make one story, and that story teaches us and tells us if we're doing well or not. So it is our perception, our discernment is actually understood as a story. It's why you don't think, am I perceiving that TV? Am I discerning that TV? You don't think like that. You think TV as in TV what? In my room, me, how much I like the lighting, what time of the day it is. Like, it's an overall story. My mojo, Jailee's coming over for lunch, she's a Jainee. It's all one big story. I can break all that down. I can break down to the various mojo associations with the TV, with Jaileen, with the lighting of the room, my mojo, and I can get all math with it. That's not my preferred, but it is there. And it won't matter if we look at the really math way or the really art way, story in this case, it lines up. It's all natural law. It's just how you're looking at it. So now you realize that actually knowing the story is how you do everything. Knowing your own mojo, that makes your story better. Knowing the mojo of the complete story, you're actually only holding, that's huge. I'm only holding half of a complete story in my conscious mind. And then the fact that that story is actually part of this overall tapestry where you go on these adventures like a comic book hero. I'm not making this up. If you can read, you'll be able to see this in motif. Once you're able to rock as a Naiji, your psyche, and you can read this on other mojos, their psyche naturally wants to actually do adventures with their other. In life, they want to actually bring that into their life. If that goes well, they naturally want to go out further and further and actually meet all the other mojos that are out there to meet. Once they actually have enough resources and confidence to do so, that's what you want to do. That's one of the major reasons that the human species is so successful. We're actually messing that up with the last, several thousand years of civilization, but actually humans overall, for the longer lineage we have evolved-wise, we've been doing that very, very well, and that's why we are the advanced evolved creature that we are. But we have to use that, or natural law will take away its gifts. Natural law has no problem doing that if a creature is not able to use the gifts correctly and to figure out what natural law wants for the next stage. There's always a next stage, and you need to figure out what natural law wants and become part of that. Thus, you continue on in the energetic spectrum. If you don't, natural law says no to you. It's very yes-no on that. If you actually figure out natural law correctly and you actually make the best practices to go along with that, then your stuff's going to work right. If not, it won't. That's mathematical. In order to understand the math, you understand in story. And story both helps understanding, but also developing yourself. So you understand all the other story variants. Understand that there are story variants. See mojo, see inspirational storyline, and see all the variants that go off of that throughout social alchemy. You should be able to read that in humans and in yourself. And if you've been working the muscle that we've been talking about in this principal series, it's there. So we start with yang yin gesturing. Look how far we've come, humans. We still have a long ways to go, but we're getting there. Takeaway from this level is that there is a human math. That human math layers. It includes all the other humans. We're supposed to work together in productive harmony. If you are reading, you will see this. This may sound whiffy in the beginning, so don't start here. Start with actually just reading. As you unlock everything, you will come to these understandings. This is just what the natural law is showing if you're able to read. Next, this is going to start, throwing more people because when you approach at this level, people think they're ready for this math, but you're not. Once you're able to see everything that came before this, what comes up next is obvious. If not, it may not be obvious to you. First, there is the fact that there are gender mojos. So there are variations on the 8 core storylines in that your gender, also your sexual orientation, these things actually affect the overall storyline. They are all beautiful and awesome, but they actually are different. And this is a crucial principle. You must know something, you must see something, understand something to honor it. You do not honor something by not giving it its truth. You must give something its truth as the first honoring you ever do. If you don't do that, all your other honorings will be dirty and on shaky footing, and that's not what you want. You want to make sure that you are always honoring properly, and the first thing you have to do, you have to know yourself, you actually have to know the other person, and you have to know the universe that you live in. By understanding these things, you can honor these things. So the principle is there is differences between the genders in enacting the different storylines, but they are equally awesome, but they must be honored by recognizing them, and thus they can fold into that harmonious productivity. they're designed to all work together. By not recognizing their particular facet in the working together, they won't work together. So actually recognizing their facet of the oneness allows them to be one with the all. If you actually don't give someone their actual facet beauty, you don't recognize its trueness, then it won't fit in. And that's not honoring. Next, age. You'll notice that there are uses of powers, and there are also just general motifs that come up. Just like you have clusters of cues, there are clusters of cues that goes with age. And this is important to note that if you can read, you'll clearly see this, and they're all beautiful, they're all valuable, and they need to be honored by what stage they are in and what they're doing with their gifts. Because each stage of life offers unique gifts, but they must be recognized in order to be honored. This brings in a continuation of being able to read story. Is once you're reading a story, you'll realize that in interaction, part of reading story is that you read character. When you're reading the story of your life in real time, it's and even just an expansive time, it's actually more powerful, more profound, more nuanced, more specific if you actually can relate that to the story of your life. And once you read in that way, going synergistically with that, intrinsically with that, is that all the component pieces are characters. So when you actually look at the character that is you realize that your character goes through different transitions. You are this character or that. You play many roles. You're still you, but you play roles. All humans play different roles at different times, different usages of their powers. This happens all the time, but you'll really see it distinctly with age phases. They're playing a different role. Whether you want to see that or not, that's simply happening. Time passing on gives you different roles to play. Humans are built to play different roles because you can see, if you can read, it's more muscle, that certain humans are better at playing the role of different ages. They play their teens well, but not their 20s. They play their 30s well, but not their 40s. They play their 50s. You know what I mean? Like they played different stages of their story, and different stages of the story, the motifs are dramatically different as a conflagration of motifs. You talk about conflagration of cues. This is a conflagration of motifs. The conflagration of motifs that humans can have is nearly infinite, and a lot of it can be had at all kinds of age phases. So, but there are certain things that go along with age phases. But because that's a principle, it stands that there are other things, such as region of the world you lived in, such as economic opportunity, and things of this nature that actually will be intrinsic to the characters that you have created, and thus the stories you have experienced, and thus your understanding of everything. Another motif is probably the stress motif. Stress and joy is you can recognize that people going through, just say bad periods, stressful periods, versus people going through good periods, bountiful, successful periods, comfortable periods, that they actually are a different character. They may even, you can still see that they are part of one overarching character, but there's a conflagration of motifs, and thus their characters' enactments that go along with the stress times versus the bliss times, the times of understanding versus the times of not understanding, things of this nature. As you continue to read, you will gain a larger muscle, a larger lens upgrade, and it will be the 1024 to infinity. This is kind of like your next upgrade in lens technology, in feats. Your metaphysical muscle can do various feats. This will just happen naturally as you can work towards it. It's like a gymnastic feat. If you work towards doing a various feat, you will get there sooner. But also if you work just gymnastic feats in general, by the time you get around to that one, you'll still have to focus on it at some point, but you'll actually have a lot of crossover, and you may even end up doing it accidentally. If you're working on all kinds of other gymnastic feats, that will kind of just will happen. But the sooner you recognize that it's there, that you want to do it and apply conscious effort, you'll get better at it sooner. The 1024 to infinity lens, go look it up where that is. That may seem big right now, But when you are able to do, it's like dancing or doing it in kind of feats, surfing, mountain climbing. There's a series of maneuvers that when you're first learning them, they seem so complicated, but actually once you've been doing it for a while, you do them pretty much on auto, and that automaticness of it sets up lots of other things. You can then do other things once you can ride a bike without thinking about it, right? You can do tricks. Once there was a period where riding a bike was like, how do I do that? Or swimming, how do I do that? And then once you can do those things, now I can actually do tricks where I can play, water polo, because swimming I can do on auto. As your natural law reading, as your story reading, your human math reading, your mojo reading, as they increase, you will actually find that what was previously seemed very large or a lot of material will just happen naturally because you'll settle in to a better math with you and your unconscious powers, for example. Because your psyche, it was built by the truth of natural law, so it was built to see it. So the more you constantly focus your lens on seeing the truth of natural law, all your powers are going to back your play. This is even simplistic, but the 1024 will allow you to place anyone in like a basic storyline structure. There's much more than 1024. There's infinite a vastness beyond that, and within it there's infinite nuance. But still, that gives you the beginning of looking at anything with this story structure. And that right there, you can realize what a complex story that is. I don't know if even George R. R. Martin is actually busting out 1024 different people. This model's actually, it's 1024 just base. Then there's infinite variations on all of those and beyond. So it just gives you an idea of the incredible sophistication. But the 1024 to infinity is kind of like that bridge where, you kind of just say at certain points it's better to actually look at story. I've looked at math, and the math is built up from powers all the way to the 1024 infinity lens. That's so high, big level math. Your psyche is designed to do even bigger calculations than that, but it's easier to do it in story form than it is to actually do in specific mathematical variable form. You are doing the mathematical variables, but you're doing it in story mode, not unlike Star Trek impulse power versus warp speed. It's all just traveling out there in the cosmos, but you're using two different technologies. Impulse and warp are like two different technologies of movement, which offer different benefits. You actually would need both or you couldn't do the job. This should be obvious, but again, it'll be stated. Once you're able to see that it's minimum 1024, all fitting together beautifully like that, and all humans fall into that or some variation of that, this is just epic, apex, evolved energy of productive harmony. There is nothing else to see but that. That is the situation. And everyone that comes from that story is beautiful and valuable and awesome. They're awesome because they're just full of heroic potential waiting to come out. And if you can read the incredible need and natural law sureness, that is something that must be honored and brought out and nurtured. There is no other way to look at the data. If you can read, there's no way to look at it that anything that comes from the human species, part of this evolving storyline, it is the most beautiful part. This is the only story we know of, and it's all one story anyway, we'll get that in a minute, of the cosmos. But even what we do know, this is the most exquisite story, and now that you can read Mojo, you see even more how exquisite it is. Anything that comes from that story is awesome and full of heroic potential. There are a lot of models. We're getting now into touching how this gets into higher implications. A lot of the models don't see that. This is a mathematical natural law fact that relates in how you see humans in a philosophical, political terms. All mojos exist as part of this heroic storyline. That means all of the genders, it means all the sexual orientations, it means all the age groups, it means all the cultures, it means all the races, everything. They're all part of this amazing story. Anyone who says anything different is automatically wrong and stupid and clearly can't read natural law. They need to work their natural law reading muscle more so they can get here. So maybe they should start with cues, then get to mojos, then get to story, etc., and come out to just reading natural law math. That is part of natural law math. Theme running through this, is that in all the storylines, the partial storylines of the Mojos, the full storylines of the Inspirationals, and so on and so forth, they were designed to do awesome stuff. They're brimming with energies. If you can read the source and tandem, momentum, and close seat. They are built to put out tremendous heroic energies. Productive energies, but harmoniously productive. They're designed to work together in such an incredible way and to make such incredible energetic things. So that's actually just a fact. It is a story of heroes. So anyone coming from that story is a hero, and they often understand things in story, and so if they understand themselves as a hero in a story, they will do what they're built to do better, all the way down to the math, nuts and bolts of it. But it was designed, the math of it was designed for humans to actually more natively understand it as story and character, and the character to be is the hero. Takeaway here for this level before we move on is the horography and the fact that humans understand themselves in story and being the hero of a particular story. That is the supreme focus that everything else should fall under. All other understanding of life success, resumes, what you're doing with your life, all come under that. There's nothing that goes over that. There's nothing that does not cover, because we were designed with story being the most all-encompassing understanding thing, which allows for understanding of the more scientific, mathematical, and also the more artistic and spiritual. They're all one thing, but you actually understand them in different ways, and you came with that ability. And story spans it all. We're talking a lot about reading, particularly on the outside. We talked some about triangulating that with yourself and your higher energies, and then what's out here. But now we're going to get more into that. So we'll talk about, for example, synesthesia. We'll go techie and we'll get a little more up into the tacit end here. If you're flexing your reading muscle, you'll be able to tell that humans, they have a way about them when they're combining their conscious perceptions, for example, and that when they're interacting with their own self, that they sometimes seem like they're actually getting increased perceptual abilities, more completeness of perception. It doesn't show physically, but you can see the effects. You can see it when they seem to be in a certain mood with themselves, and also when they're relating, for example, to another person, Mojo, who has those powers. You'll see more of a completeness. This happens with the discernment powers. It happens overall. So synesthesia, synamnia. Synesthesia exists, synesthesia exists, and so does synamnia. If you can read, you'll be able to read those phenomena happening, including the fact that they go together the way they do, but also the conscious and unconscious. You will be able to read with your muscle that these powers were designed to work as part of 8, that's simplest, and then out as part of a story. So there's always like increasing bubble sizes to what is being operated on, but you can come from it from the standpoint of story and get it all. The part where you say, for example, getting a little more of taking out this techie, we'll go with like disengaging. You can see on other humans and your own video footage if you watch it that you disengage and kind of interact with yourself. So that's a phenomenon. Read that that's happening. Not just, oh, disengaging means these powers, whatever. More meaning, read more meaning. They are dialoguing with themselves. It's almost like they went in to talk to themselves or do something inside. So the fact that humans do that is bringing in these relationships. So again, it starts with kind of powers and techie, but then it kind of goes into relationships, and the relationships turn into story and character. For example, Pt.3 theory is actually coming out from the teaching story that I'm given by my synamnia, which is Martian Manifesto. That's not weird. That's actually common for Naiji to do it in that way. And it's important to note that for any human, if that is how the synamnia is giving it to you, and they're giving you, excellent, math and art, then you want to let what you're built to do what it does. So there's an art to it, and you want to let that art flow. It's important. If you allow that art to flow, it brings awesome math. And vice versa, if you study math of natural law enough, you'll be like, wow, what a work of art. There's really no way to do either one correctly and not end up with both. Does That's the principle of Pt.3, is the teaching story is a human's native way of understanding most stuff that connects to everything, and that, for example, Pt.3 is coming through the Martian Manifesto teaching story of myself, and that is consistently giving great math, so we're going to go with the way that wants to flow, because the way it wants to flow gives better answers. This relates to, for example, the use of the alien mascots and other kinds of things you're seeing as far as a colorful branding of Pt.3. That is part of our principles, that the Synamnia teaching story actually seems to think that that is a very effective way to get across the truth. So as long as it's consistently getting better math than other people or systems, you want to respect that way of doing things, as long as it's giving superior answers. So that is where the most superior answers are coming about natural law these days, and so it'll flow in that way, because that's the way it wants to come out through me, for example. But also it's because the Synamnia, actually, of all my powers, which is greater than my conscious understanding, it wants to put out what it sees as the most impactful way of doing that, which is greater than my understanding. And so if I allow that to flow, that'll happen. If you can read, you will know that you can actually let yourself flow and get better stuff than you can do when you're just trying to just think it out. That's, again, just life reading. If you can read Mojo better, you'll be able to read that part of natural law better as well. It is a given. Going along with that, you'll find that these creatures have an autonomous quality to them. If you can read yourself well enough, you'll know that yourself and others, as they're dialoguing to find out the stuff, as people do, that the more you actually treat it as an actual dialogue, not so, and you don't want to go crazy, but because you want to recognize that it's all you, but the more you're able to interact with the facets of yourself in the story form that it wants to present itself, it has the most effective way of giving you the information and enlightenment, because that's how it wants to teach it to you. Regardless of what language you want to learn in, you are actually built with higher truth of that, and it wants to teach you that, but it wants to teach you it in its best way. So that's why we're seeing a lot of this Synamnia. Next principle is, going along with that, the use of the unusual names like Na, Ji, things of this nature, other unique terms, because they're unique concepts that humans, first of all have and need to come and look at fresh because they've lost their way. Any use of actually trying to bring in other models, other cultures, other systems, way of doing it, other wording, that's incorrect, and it brings in the incorrect math association. So it does that, and it makes it the property of that culture in a way. It's often that chance, the culture trying to appropriate a principle of natural law. The reason that my spirits or my Synamnia like the use of the aliens and other kinds of cool stuff for the teaching is that, besides that it gives a full tilt immersion, that's how I believe in teaching, full tilt, all 8 powers and everything else that goes with it, story form, it should be natural law for everyone. So it should be unique words that the global population of humans can all collectively ladle meaning on. So the more there is able to do that, then it is universal meaning for everyone. So that makes total sense. And again, if you can read all the way up from before through the human matrix and so forth, that's just going to be obvious to your apparatus. You'll be able to easily observe that aspect of natural law. You may not be able to now, but it is there for you to read once you get that muscle built up enough. So get to it. Continuing on, get more about the dialogue with these autonomous entities, is you actually have a way to that as well. And the more you can read the way of Mojo and other parts of natural law, particularly human math natural law, you'll actually see that, again, look these things up. You are the apparatus to a Mazoot. The Daryu dialogues with you, so does the other, so does the Fumasta, the Shiny Baby, and so forth. You need to know that happens. The more you're able to read humans, you'll be able to read their motifs and what goes on the better, and your own. And part of that is you dialogue with spirits. They present themselves to you in this way as moods, but these moods actually combine with like certain rituals like fear or rage or whatever, or passion and so forth. And again, it goes with the clustering of physiological cues, the clustering of motifs. These ritual thematics that come so strong, they come from your unconscious, they come clustered together, first of all. And then these clusters you can dialogue with them as a kind of like a group, and this dialogue often can be personified. And the doing so actually aids the understanding. All these things you can read. The more you can read, other kinds of more simple math like the Mojo and whatnot, this math will become obvious to you. Going up with the observation of simply that you dialogue with autonomous energies within yourself, and that doing so actually is native to you, that story way of doing it. And the more you do so, the pantheon of characters actually goes into your unconscious. So the social alchemy you're experiencing out here and in here, in like conscious, sort of representation of out here, you have unconscious material that wants to populate that understanding. It wants to merge with your story. The social alchemy story out here, the story of what you think things are in your conscious mind, and then your unconscious mind wants to be part of that continuum of understanding, part of that continuum of story. As you go past the personified kind of form area, you'll go into the mergings, and go ahead and look up that what it is, but simply it exists. That if you actually go up that sort of elevator of enlightenment, you will actually get into that bliss merging state with still it's energy dialogue, but it's not like it was before. Again, you need to have those experiences. You have a whoa, yes, seeing pod power, seeing mojo, see story, see motif, see social alchemy, dialogue with things in here, dialogue with, for example, your pod powers. Start there if you want. When you actually try to do any of your pod powers, if you try to do that directly, like in a technical way, it doesn't work so good. It works much better if you actually try to embody a character, again, character and story, that actually uses that power heroically. If you want to try to embody that character, that's the best way to turn it on. So, again, character and story. The thing is, a lot of these characters are autonomous, particularly when they come from your unconscious, but they teach you. They teach in a more personified form, in conscious or sort of semi-conscious way, up the elevator. And then the mergings, it's beyond your brain's ability to capture in the way you think of now. But when you experience it, it's like going into a bath of enlightenment. When you come back out of the bath and you go back to toweling off and being yourself, you're so much wiser than you were before. You need to see that through mojo and story that happens, and what it looks like and how it helps people and so forth, and the fact that you are built to do that as well, that you've had those experiences, or you could have, that have those experiences, and read yourself. This is like, that's read, yes, read the phenomenon that you actually can merge with a shiny baby. Read that others can. So you need to actually build your lens up and then train it on others and yourself, and the process of being a human and realizing that elevator enlightenment happens, the dialoguing phases and the mergings, and what it's like. It is a phenomenon of natural law. It is spiritual, it is spirit forming, but it is a phenomenon of natural law. And if you've been working your metaphysical muscle, you'll read that part of natural law just like everything else, because it is there to be seen and it connects to everything else, and it is. This includes cosmos, our understanding of that. You actually are built to have a supreme understanding of the cosmos, of Gaia, of energy evolving entirely, of natural law. So we were built by all those things, and you can read that. You can, this is reading. You need, I mean, it should be obvious with Gaia, or that you're part of all the species, but going on with the Gaia thing, you need to read that you're part of the evolutionary chain. That's the kind of reading. If you've read everything you've read up so far till now, it should be a no-brainer. Your muscles should be strong enough, your lens should be clear enough for you to see that you are part of the story of all the animal life on this planet, including the geological life that got here, and then everything that made the cosmos. That's reading. If you are reading natural law, you're just putting all these things together, tapestry, it all connects. And we connect as energy evolved creatures, just like all the other ones did on this planet and the rest of the cosmos. This makes you able to understand existence better. So, cosmos, Gaia, tribe humanity, you and I, story, all together, productive harmony, it's amazing. And so that is the situation. I'm not just going, throwing preaching at you here. No, that's just the truth. If you can read, that is the situation we are in. We don't know what we're in, and thus we're actually in a much poorer, a much darker, harder situation than we should be, because we're not actually recognizing the higher story and thus using our higher heroic gifts. We're operating at just a villainous victim capacity. Definitely undead, zombies to vampires. That's what people are doing right now, so we need to stop. Right there. Zombies and vampires. That may actually seem, ooh, all whifty. Okay, I can put it into technical terms. People who misread themselves as far as their powers, their relationships, life, story, yada yada. Once you can read that's there. We can go through all the symptoms of that, but it basically means that they have actually completely checked out, either in a victim way or a villain way. Those are the words, victim, villain, a zombie, vampire. They're actually metaphors and things like that can capture a lot of mathematical meaning. It doesn't change the fact that it's true. So we can actually do a more clinical description of how people's pod powers are fucked up and not developed and are overmodulated and stress locked and so forth, where we can talk about it in story form. Either way, the truth is the truth. Either way, heroes need to do what heroes need to do. Something kind of brings us together is the Scientific Spirituality Index. Go ahead and look up what that is. But the point is, you have all those 8 powers together doing it. There is a union of that, of all 8 powers. But there is a different understanding of what's going on in existence, but it's all one thing. It's not unlike kind of strumming, again, in story, you can also think other metaphors like you're strumming those powers like an instrument, almost like keys on a keyboard or maybe like strings on a string instrument that actually are making the tapestry, making the story tapestry. And one that comes together, whether you think about it as a story or you think about it as a metaphor or something like that, or whatever you want to, the fact remains that there is better or worse ways to do it. The use of the powers, the use of peak pathways of social alchemy, of dialoguing with pod power spirit forms, dialoguing with elevator enlightenment spirit forms, all that. There is better and worse ways to do it, and all of existence is basically that. That's all of existence, and we are heroically meant to do amazing things, and we are responsible to use our powers to their fullest, because that is the way to honor them being given to us. That may sound whifty, but let's put down the more worldly principle now. So we've done a lot of spirit forming stuff, but it means that the state of spirits, the state of story, the state of alchemy, the state of mojo, the state of pod powers, that's existence. That's existence, okay? So everything is what brought to that, and that's everything we're going to know going forward. That's the everything of us. So we have to shepherd it. We actually have to honor this story, which means we have to find out what rituals make the story go best and which rituals don't. And then we are responsible for those rituals. That's the takeaway here. Once you can read, you know that humans can be read. You're responsible for that power now. It's important. You now know that you have this knowledge and it affects them and it affects you. You're responsible for that. Once you can read social alchemy, you're responsible. Once you can read story, you're responsible. So, spirits is part of that as well, and we are responsible to make sure that we take care of the gift we were given, and we help others to do that. That is the natural law of it. That is the just survival of the fittest superior way, and is the heroic altruistic thing to do. And it is the most harmoniously productive thing to do because it's all one thing. It is the only one thing to do. Be the hero in your story, which means find out what it is, find out how it can work, and do the best with it. That's what it means. Coming up, we'll get into what that actually means to do these best, practices. But the one thing that it would be obvious is that your life would actually have to be completely devoted, focused, in line with enacting those heroic best practices according to natural law. So you've actually seen what this gift is you have, although you may not have been reading it as a gift at first. But as you start reading it, you're reading it as the gift that it is. Once you realize that, you then start realizing that it works a certain way. I have a certain gift, it works a certain way. It needs to be honored. And there are ways it needs to be honored. This is important because humans at large aren't really doing that right now. So we'll get to that in a little bit, but we'll start off with there would need to be a complete realigning of life practices to go along with the fact that we now know how the story of us goes. And if you can read, you'll be able to clearly see that the way we are built to have a story is so much larger, more heroic than the stories that we are leading. So coming next, we'll talk about how personally you need to do your life in order to actually do this being human stuff the best, and then also how that works with other people who may not know pod layer, may not understand these things, or may know some, but they actually have opposing opinions. So that's part of it. So we've seen this truth. This truth actually means that you're supposed to be here with Mojo, yada yada, and that will mean living a certain kind of life. And living a certain kind of life has certain implications to other people and the way they live their lives. And just in general, natural law and what it feels like it's doing. So natural law, energy evolving, it's evolving in different ways. Positive ways, scary ways, and that's going to happen. And then we actually have to figure out what we're going to do with the heroic free will we have. We have free will to exert our gifts and to work with what natural law is giving. The gifts connected to it, but also making decisions, understanding better, exerting heroic effort to make the whole experience of natural law unfolding through energy evolution, the pinnacle of which is us. Let's do it at the level natural law built us to do it at, which is apex.